Welcome! I'm so glad you're here. I'm Gila Ross, parenting educator and coach, author of Living Beautifully, and host of the Confident Parent podcast, bringing you the content you need to bring more ease, joy, and love into your parenting so that you can show up as the parent you want to be to your children. Welcome. I'm so excited to have with us today in the studio Dr. Ilyssa Bass, who is here to talk about parenting complex kids. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you come with a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so I came to parenting with like you said, a wealth of experience and knowledge. I had been a teacher, an early childhood educator. I had multiple degrees in child development, counseling psychology, clinical psychology. I was most of the way through my doctorate when I first was born, and I thought I was so set. I thought I knew stuff. And then, and then of course I had a child, and then I realized I didn't know anything at all. I was so great at helping other people's kids, but I had a child who was really, really complex, and it's not a euphemism when I say complex. That's not some way of not saying ADHD or not saying autism or not saying anxiety or not saying, or it really is, he was just complex, right? That like kind of
Right.
depending on what angle you looked at him, you could give all kinds of diagnosis or no diagnosis at all. He was clearly super, 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 super bright, super, 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 super sensitive, didn't sleep, was super picky eating.
Right.
And so you could look at it as just a sleep disturbance. We need to figure out the sleep disturbance, and then he'll be more emotionally regulated. The meltdowns will stop. We need to, get him in the right kind of classroom. We need to put him in therapy. He needs OT, he needs PT, he needs speech, and it was such an overwhelming experience. And in addition to all of those voices about all of the services he might or might not need, there were also plenty of voices in my life going like, you're just an anxious mom. He's still 2, 3, 4. He's fine. This is totally within the range of normal. It's just because you're a psychologist that you're seeing everything. And so I really entered motherhood with a tremendous amount of overwhelm, exhaustion, feeling misunderstood and judged by some people, feeling overwhelmed by some people's interpretation of how many deficits my son had. It was a very, very confusing experience. And like I said, it like shook me to my core because I had always been someone who was really, really good with kids and looked forward to motherhood. And I had this beautiful, intelligent child who could just fall to pieces in an instant from a broken cookie, the fact that we didn't have bananas, his shoes being too tight. It was really a very intense experience. And so I remember one day sitting on the floor after like a major meltdown, and I was just like drained to the core, and kind of making this little promise to myself that when I figured out what on earth was going on, that I would help other parents who were in that place of suffering. And it really was suffering because I felt like my child was falling apart and I didn't know how to help. It was more than chaotic, it was painful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that because I think one of the things that you've highlighted is how, as a parent, you can be so competent and skilled in different areas in life. And even for yourself, it was in kids, right? And then you can have a child that just brings you to your knees, right? With their needs and the complexity.
and it's a humbling, it can be a lonely journey, it can be, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us all, and also how you've channeled that into helping other parents. So let's just clarify for everyone that's listening. When you talk about complex child, what are we talking about?
So sometimes the complexity comes with the diagnosis. When I say complex, I'm usually referring to kids who look like the other kids generally on the playground. They have more of like a hidden difference. But the hidden difference is not simple. There are kids who have ADHD, they take a stimulant medication, they're mostly fine during school. It's a little hard to eat, they're a little cranky in the afternoon, but it's really not a big deal. It's not so complex. It's very clear what it is and how to treat it. That as I work with parents, that really is the minority, right? That a child has like one simple, oh, it was, just a speech delay. We went to speech and it was all fine. Or it was just a sensory issue. We went to OT and then everything was fine. Maybe that's just people who are drawn into my world. I don't know. But complex really means there's more than one issue going on. Cognitively, this child may be gifted or have learning differences. Emotionally, they may miss social cues or be hypersensitive to social cues. Sensory wise, they may have really like hypersensory experiences or hyposensory experiences. And so their mind can be understimulated and their body can be overstimulated, and emotionally they can be doing quite well. So you get, I think a lot of times with complex kids or kids with hidden differences, it's not even so clear what it is, because very often they'll hold it together in school and they'll come home and they'll totally melt out, freak out, lose it. And their mom's going like, I must be parenting wrong because their teacher says they're an angel. But really they've kind of figured out how to, hold in their sensory needs or whatever it is at school. And then they come home and they just, you know, need stimulation so badly that they're literally banging into the walls, just for some intense body input. So when I say complex, I mean there's more than one thing going on, and it's really not easy to find out. It may take multiple professionals, it may take an evaluation, it may take multiple evaluations. It's sort of this experience of parenting that needs a lot of support, and a lot of support from other moms who get it, because it's not a question of finding out what it is and fixing it. That's sort of how we all enter when our kids are suffering. But we come to find out that this is not something you fix. It's something you understand, you accommodate, you skill build, but it fixes kind of the wrong paradigm.
Right. Yeah, I love what you're saying. And I think one of the things that I picked up on what you're saying is that because it's not easy to kind of say, oh, it's just this, it's just that. There's a lot of guilt and shame and judgment or feeling judged from other parents about or just about what's going on, because it's not like, okay, this is what it is and you did X and then it's fixed, right? There's that a lot more of the understanding and the living with it.
And the parenting journey is complex because maybe you are using some of the wrong parenting techniques, but you can't find the right ones. Nothing seems to, where you're kind of in this place of being like, I will do what the right thing is if someone can tell me what on earth that is. It takes a long time to figure out the child, to figure out what works for the child, to figure out what the resources are for the kid, for the parent. And so there's often some isolation, some feeling of being judged, but there's a lot of like inner doubt and noise because you have this child who it feels like they're suffering, and you can't make it stop,
Yeah.
or you feel
Thank
like you're suffering.
you. Thank you for clarifying that. So the what we're going to kind of do on this episode is talk about two truths and a lie. So do you want to share with us what the two truths and the lie are? I mean, you can do whichever order you want, and then the audience can kind of try and figure out which one's the lie and whether they got it right or not.
Okay. So I have to All right, I'll do two truths and a lie here. We've got these kids really are harder to parent. Um, the whole family needs more support. And um, it's extremely important to find the right diagnosis as soon as possible.
So I think I may have guessed it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about each one. So t tell us a little bit more about each of those points.
Okay, how much do you want me to expound on them? Like briefly and then really flesh them out, or you want me to flesh
Let's
each?
let's flesh each one out, and then at the end of it, we can sort of, I think it'll become clear which one is the
Yes,
non-truth,
it
right?
will very, very quickly. So, and again, there's a lot of complexity around a lot of this. So, these kids really are harder to parent. Is I think you get voices on both sides. There are definitely people, they're usually selling something, who go like, I have figured out how to parent ADHD children. I know how to get your child to listen without threats or bribes, right? That's the line that if you say, you sell a lot of parenting stuff. You count to three and your children will listen and be obedient. Um, I think there are techniques that work much better for complex kids for sure. But kids are so unique, and our kids who are really stressed out, right? They're very our complex kids, our kids with eating differences, they're very big souls in little bodies, right?
Right.
They're often um very gifted in one area. And I don't mean like savant gifted. I mean, sometimes they have an exceptional sense of what's right in the world. They're often very like justice oriented. Sometimes there'll be kids who are extremely empathic or sometimes so empathic that they actually have to pull into themselves and they appear not empathic at all because other people's emotions are so overwhelming. There are often kids who like the world moves too fast and too intensely for them. They need more quiet, more control over the pace of their own lives. So these kids really, really are harder to parent, right? It's true. Some of our kids are not so overwhelmed by the pace of the regular world. They kind of move through the world in a way that the world is stressful, but not like break the bank every day. These kids really are experiencing incredible amounts of stress from the noise in school, how boring school is, or how over demanding school is, how confusing their friends are, or how important their friends are to them. So that if their friend says something wrong, it's devastating to them. They really, really are having more intense and more frequently intense emotions. It's real. And they bring it home. And so we very often have this parallel experience of feeling like our life is so much more intense,
Yeah.
right? They move through the
Yeah.
world in a high stress way, and then it makes our lives stressful. You want to
I,
say something?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that point out because there's I'm sure anyone that's listening and for myself as a parent of many kids and complex kids, you know that deep down that there are some kids that are just harder to parent and it's parenting, as I'm sure you're aware, is not just about getting our kids to listen, it's about raising them to adulthood. And some kids, it is just harder to parent them. And I'm glad you brought that out. Um, is there something you would kind of say that makes the journey a little bit easier as parents?
You want the good news or the bad news? Uh,
Both.
yeah, I think the good news is if you really let that in, if you really let it in that this child really is harder. There's a bit of a grief for what you thought your life was going to look like. This is a child who's going to have more appointments. This is a child who's going to be more expensive. These kids can be really expensive because they need services and we can't always get them publicly. I am going to need to do less temporarily in my life because I have a child who has high needs and someone needs to sort of be case managing. So the good news is that if you really deeply accept that, you can save yourself a lot of burnout. The bad news is that it often creeps up on us, right? That it's usually after moms burn out because they've been trying to, you know, keep their job, keep their marriage afloat, put some kind of healthy dinner on the table, do it all with very little help, with very little family support. It's very often when parents kind of fall apart that they go like, oh my gosh, I think I need to work part-time, or I think I need to ask my husband to come home multiple times a week and make dinner. I cannot sustain what I'm doing for this child and the way my life is structured right now. So that's the good news and the bad news is that it's real. And if you had a child who was born with a serious and diagnosed medical condition from birth, you would mourn sooner and you would go, this is a child who I'm going to have to be back and forth with to the hospital. And the world would kind of accommodate. You would go, I have a medically fragile child. Everyone would understand. And the thing with hidden differences is that your child does look like all the other kids at the playground. Or people go like, I have a kid with ADHD and I don't need to miss work. But some kids really are more complex. They need more services, or they fall through diagnostic cracks, so they don't qualify for public services. So you have to find all the service providers and coordinate the service providers, and it really can burn people out. So it's important to accept that this is real, that this is harder, that this is going to influence your life. It's going to take a lot of negotiation between you and your co-parent about how you're going to manage that, but it is real and it is a time commitment, and it is going to need, either for you to zoom out on your life and take some things out temporarily, or put more support in.
Thank you. That was helpful. Helpful. What was the second?
So that dovetails right into the whole family is going to need more support. I think very often there's this kind of pushback of like, what do you mean the whole family needs more support? Like, I'm going to bring this child to, OT once a week and some emotional therapy once a week. And like, what is it? Why does the whole family need more support? What on earth does that mean? So our complex kids create complex family dynamics, right? And you're smiling as I say that.
Because I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because we talk about the complex kids, but like, parents who have complex kids see the impact that it has on the other kids, right? So I'm so pleased that you're actually bringing this up as a point and as a topic to discuss. So yeah.
So when you have a complex child, and they very often have very big meltdowns, they spend a lot of time with a really overtaxed nervous system. They can flip into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn meaning sort of masking or pretending that everything is okay, but inside they're highly charged. They can slip there so easily that they really can have very big and sometimes violent meltdowns. And the other kids witness it. And it is stressful. And it also becomes like those kinds of meltdowns and some of the violent things our kids can say or do. It sort of puts those things on the menu for your other kids of things that kids do when they're really angry. So now all of a sudden you have a totally neurotypical, kind of easy, 5-year-old in the house, but he witnesses your 11-year-old slamming doors and yelling things at you. And all of a sudden you have a 5-year-old who, when he gets angry, starts slamming doors and yelling at his mommy. And you go like, I know he wouldn't do this if I didn't have my 11-year-old. And you're right. He wouldn't. But now when he's angry, this is on the menu for him. Now, the neurotypical child can very often, very often behavior modification things will work to help them phase out of that behavior. I know you've seen that behavior. It's not okay in our house. When you are angry, you can do one of these things on this list. You can punch a pillow. You can say, I'm so angry. You can, and if you do one of those things, we'll put a check on a chart and you can win a Lego, whatever it is. That will work for a child who is just sort of mimicking the complex behaviors, but isn't necessarily in fight, flight, or freeze. That is not going to work for the kid who's so high stress that he's gone. He doesn't even know what he's saying or doing. You're not going to behavior modify your child out of that kind of behavior when really what they need is, a smaller class size or services or whatever it is they need. So the whole family really does need more support. It very quickly brings up whatever your childhood stuff is. Our complex kids are such a growth opportunity because they will do things that are really highly charged. And you as a parent will automatically do whatever you did in your childhood that kept you safe. So in your family of origin, when things got tense in your family, were you a fighter? Were you one of the oldest who stood up and said, hey, we need to stop doing this, and it worked? Were you a fleer? You went to your bedroom, you went to the neighbor, you went to a friend's house, and you just avoided it? Were you a freezer? You kind of stayed there, but like emotionally went kind of numb and checked out. We all did these things as children when things got chaotic in our own homes. And it doesn't have to be like at the level of trauma. When you were a kid, you could do those things because you weren't responsible for the house. But your complex child will trigger those things in you. And so it's a real growth opportunity for parents to work on that so that they can be really present for their child. Because if you go into fight, flight, or freeze, the meltdown just lasts forever. So parents often enter their own therapy or couples therapy. Parents often need a lot more babysitting. I always say like a good babysitter that works for your complex kid is like gold. I would spend money on a babysitter probably before any intervention because it just, even if they can't be with your complex child, if they can be with the other kids so that they don't kind of feel like mommy disappears when the complex child has high needs. It's really, really helpful. And then sometimes it is siblings who need some emotional support because their sibling is going through something really difficult. And we used to call it therapeutic bedtime, that like my husband and I would need to put some of our younger kids to sleep and just listen to like, how much they hate their brother or how unfair it is, that yada, yada, yada. Like it really took a lot of time to listen to our other kids talk about what was going on in their worlds. And some of it was because, there was a complex child in the house, and some of it was just their inner emotional worlds. But some of those therapeutic bedtimes lasted as long as a real therapy session. So the whole family does need more support when there's a complex child in the picture. That is absolutely true.
Yeah, yes. And I'd like to ask you, because you mentioned a couple of things that sort of come up with siblings, like sometimes they'll, behaviors become on the menu, or they'll, the stress and the hatred, etc. How do you talk to siblings about the child with complex needs?
That is a phenomenal question. Mostly you listen much more than you talk. That's that's number one. I would say, behind closed doors where the complex sibling cannot hear, I will sometimes just invite a sibling to be like, you are having a really hard time with Shmuley right now. Do you want to tell me how angry you are at him? And then what I'll do is I'll say awful, awful, awful things, and I'll just validate the underlying emotion. I want to kill him. You are really angry at him. We should throw him in the garbage. We should send him to an orphanage. You really wish he wasn't in the house sometimes. All the time. You really wish he wasn't in the house all the time. And I'll just validate the underlying emotion, and I'll let them say all the things that they can't say in front of the sibling. So that's number one. Number two is I usually stick with like his brain is different. It's very sensitive. When you make loud noises, he hits and he can't really control it. He's trying or working. He's working on people with it at school. He's working on people with it. We know it's happening. And his brain is different. And he's working on it. And it's not your fault, but it's also wise not to make loud noises around him when you can help it. I usually kind of talk about it on that level. Whether or not to share diagnoses is a larger question. I'm actually doing a parenting summit for parents of Jewish kids who are complex. It's January 27th through February 2nd, and there's a speaker who's just talking about diagnosis, and she addresses how to talk to siblings about diagnoses and how to distinguish between privacy and secrecy. It's really a great topic.
That's very, very important and helpful.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that the next one's not going to be a truth.
Well, by two truths and a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to find the right diagnosis right away so we can fix it. Diagnosis is so helpful when it's helpful. Psychiatrists with the best of intent, I believe, created the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is what we use in the States. But whatever kind of mental health book of symptoms you're using, they really were created to help mostly psychiatrists and medical professionals talk to each other, to know that they were all calling the same thing schizophrenia, calling the same thing manic, calling the same. So they're just lists of symptoms. That's what they are. And brain research is really so young in its development. We know exactly how the human knee works because we can look at someone's knee when we do knee surgery, right? We know what a knee is. We can look through scans and we can look on autopsy, but we cannot just watch a human brain in real time and figure out what structural differences are, how medication is working. Stem cell research is getting there. They're growing parts of brains in petri dishes, and then we will know a lot more about how the brain works. But the reality is that a diagnosis is simply a list of symptoms that are already observable and putting them into a category, right? So it really depends who's looking at your child as to whether or not they'll get a diagnosis. I've worked with a lot of parents who go like, well, if he got an autism diagnosis when he was 11, why didn't he get it when he was 4 when we took him for this evaluation or that evaluation? You go like, because the range of normal is wider when you're 4 and he was still in the range of normal. So he became autistic between 4 and 11? No, he met the symptoms then and he meets the symptoms now. But the range of normal actually changed on you because he got older, and 11-year-olds don't really have meltdowns anymore when 4-year-olds do. So the fact that it never went away is what qualified you to check off the symptom boxes that you had to check off. So I think most parents with totally good intent are used to the medical model. They go like, okay, so if something's medically wrong, if there's a diagnosis, let's fix it. If we find the diagnosis, we should know what to do. And are then really a rude awakening when you get a diagnosis and you go, okay, so how do you fix that? How do you cure that? How do you help that? And people go, well, it's really so different for every child. And it's kind of a letdown because you kind of go like, my child has asthma, I know what to do. If my child has eczema, I know what to do. If my child has ADHD, now what? Well, we try stimulant medication sometimes, and sometimes we try behavioral interventions, and sometimes we try cognitive behavioral therapy, and sometimes, what do you mean sometimes? What do you mean? It's very confusing for parents, and I think that the social model of disability rather than the medical model is a better fit for kids with brain-based differences, meaning there are people who are Harvard professors who are on the autism spectrum, and they can lecture to thousands of people, and they cannot go to a mall. So do they not have autism on a stage, but they do it at a mall? Yes, kind of, because the things that trigger them into repetitive behaviors and difficulty with social situations and sensory sensitivities, they're not happening on stage. They're fully in control of their environment. So none of those three things fit for them on the stage, and all three of those things fit for them in a crowded, overstimulating mall. So there really are situations or environments that can kind of disable the person, which is very confusing because that's not how the medical model works, right? If your knee is broken, it is broken. It is not situational. Some situational things might agitate it, but your range of functioning is limited.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. So if there was kind of one thing that you wanted parents of complex children to know, to walk away with today, what would it be?
Don't do it alone. 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 I think in the time since I went through this struggle, and now there's so many more resources and podcasts and summits and things you don't even have to pay for just to start to get your footing. But trust your maternal intuition and trust it when it says, I don't know. I don't know how to help this child eat after school. I don't know. But I'm gonna go and I'm gonna look for information, and I'm gonna connect with other mothers, and I'm gonna try the things that seem like they might work for my child. And if something feels like it's just gonna end in a power struggle, I'm not even gonna try. I'm gonna keep looking for resources and abandon a little bit that there's one book I'm gonna read that's just gonna be the light bulb moment that's gonna make this child better. It's a process, it's a journey. It's a very rewarding journey because it's going to require a lot of self-growth on your part. But don't do it alone. Find other mommies who are in the club of mommies who get it. They're more than you think. Go to a science museum. The minute it opens, you will find them. Go to parks at weird hours. They are there. Or there are many online groups that you can join.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been really helpful and really like so much we touched upon that I wish we had more time to kind of dive deeper in. And I really, really appreciate your time. And in terms of not going it alone, I know that you also are running a summit. You want to tell us just a little bit more about the summit?
Sure. So I tend to work in the Jewish community. This summit really is addressing the unique kind of social constructs of raising your differently wired child in Jewish communities. Because there are funny things, there is a day when we just kind of stay with the family, and it's really challenging for complex kids. So there are a lot of very culturally specific things. And the summit is January 27th through February 2nd. And it's called the Parenting Complex Kids Summit. You can get there by going to drilyssabass.com/summit. That's drilyssabass.com/summit. And it's 5 days. It's 5 days of some phenomenal speakers addressing all kinds of topics having to do with raising complex kids, discussing diagnosis, discussing technology use, finding spiritual meaning in your parenting struggles, learning how to problem solve with kids who have processing issues. There's all kinds of great content there, and there's also a lot of great validation there. Parents always write to me after and go like, I didn't even realize how isolated I felt until I just listened to speaker after speaker talk about the things that I was going through every day. So that's the summit. Thank you for letting me plug it and for letting me talk to your audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your compassion with us. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avot. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.